Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. My name's Brent. The weather's warming up around here and I'm really getting back into the swing of things on my new timber framed woodworking shop. Now I'd always planned in this video series on talking about everything right from the footers right up to the ridge, and though it's focused primarily to date on the timber framing side of stuff, and I have a lot of timber framing content coming up, you're going to see a few videos coming up on different aspects of the build. For example, in this video, we're going to talk about a temporary off-grid power solution that we have set up. We're going to use and rely heavily on during the construction phase. So it'll probably be a couple of years before we have municipal power up at the site. So I wanted a battery-based solution to help us out during the construction phase. Now I've got a great generator and we'll use that for continuous use, but a battery-based system is really great. Say if you're only running 100 watts of lights or something like that, you don't want to run your generator just to run such a small load like that. But also if you need to charge, say, cordless batteries, or you just want to run a radio or something like that, it's great to not have to use the generator. But also, unfortunately, we did have a break-in last year, so having a battery-based system that will run sort of motion detecting security lights, for example, is great as well. But the system that we've built up actually has enough power to run the big timber frame power tools if needed. Now, if I have to do a bunch of them, of course, I'll run the generator for that. But if I've forgotten to do one silly cut, or I need to use the drill press for one hole or something like that, it'd be great not to have to wheel the generator outside in the rain, start it up, warm it up, make the one cut, and then pull the generator back in. A battery-based system is going to be very convenient. Now, the heart of our system is the batteries. Let's take a closer look at these. So these are lithium-ion batteries. These are made by Royer Batteries here in Canada. I have no affiliation with Royer. They're not sponsoring the channel or this video. I have no plans on buying additional batteries, so this is sort of an unfiltered assessment of them and their batteries. These are actually assembled in Canada from, a mixture of North American and offshore components, of course, but because they're assembled in Canada, they're duty-free to be sold to the United States, so that's nice. These are 12-volt, 170 amp-hour batteries. Now, I could have bought one battery that had just about the same capacity as this, but this configuration made a lot more sense for us because when the construction phase is done, what we'll do is we'll split these up into two outbuildings, and we'll be able to have two smaller sort of off-grid setups in each of these outbuildings, which will never have municipal power anywhere near them. They make these in 12 volt, 48 volt, in 24 volt, all the way up to 320 amp hours. Now what I liked about these when I got them is these aren't plastic. These cases are metal, and they're held, the tops are held on by honest to goodness machine screws. And these handles on the top, other than a plastic sleeve to make it a little easier on your hand when you're carrying them around, this entire handle is metal and it's held on by 5 or 6 machine screws. So it's obviously a very durable package, which is nice. Now, lithium ion are rapidly taking over the off-grid storage market, and for good reason. The weight advantage over lead acid is sort of less of a draw for a stationary situation, but they offer plenty of advantages over lead acid batteries. One, there's no venting or maintenance required. So there's no nasty acids, there's no periodic, checking of levels, and there's no venting requirements for the room they're in. So that's all really nice. Also, per effective or usable amp hour, they take up a lot less space. That's great for tiny houses and van life folks, but even in a regular house, the sort of the closet space that you need to set aside for your battery storage is a lot less for this style of battery. Now I say usable amp hour, and that's because this style of battery can be routinely run up and down, say 80% of its charge without any real risk to it. Whereas a lead acid battery, once you get down to about 50%, the voltage starts to drop off a little bit, and many electronics start to object. In fact, your inverter can often kick right off. And once you're down below 50%, you risk permanent damage to your lead acid batteries. Now, one interesting statistic I read about these is you can actually run these down every second day for 16 years, and at the end, they'll still have 80% of their original storage capacity. So that means you can use these heavily for 16 years straight, and at the end of it, they'll still be 80% as good as new. I wish my truck was like that. So this brings me down to cost. Now, lithium-ion batteries cost more per on-label amp hour rating, but the reality of it is you can actually use almost all of the storage in a lithium-ion battery, whereas a lead-acid battery, as I just described, you can't use the whole thing. So you have to buy far fewer lithium-ion batteries than you would lead acid to achieve the same storage. There are many other additional advantages over lead acid, but that's kind of the highlight reel. Okay, so there's lots of great reasons to go with lithium ion batteries over the old school lead acid, but these batteries have a couple of unique features that I want to describe. First of all, lithium ion batteries often get all lumped together as the same, but the reality of it is the battery chemistry employed in lithium ion batteries can be very different. These are lithium iron phosphate batteries, and that's significant because this style of battery does not burst into flames like a lot of the other ones. We've all seen on the news EVs and electronics and even e-bikes and whatnot. If they get damaged, when they can easily catch fire, and when they do catch fire, they're really hard to put out. But this style of battery does not behave that way, so they're a lot safer. But even within the style of lithium iron phosphate batteries, there are a couple of different main ways that you can build a battery. One is by using a huge collection of small cylindrical batteries, and the other one is by using prismatic cells. These batteries use a collection of prismatic cells. Now, there are a lot of very technical details, a lot of differences between these, but here are some of the main ones that may be significant to you. A cylindrical style battery is composed of a huge collection from dozens to hundreds of these small cylindrical batteries. Each one of them has to be connected together, so it's quite a sophisticated and quite a complicated battery. A prismatic style of battery has fewer cells and therefore fewer connections. These batteries, for example, each have only 4 cells in them. This makes them a lot less complicated, and this style of battery, for example, can take up 50% less space. They're also much lighter, and because they're a lot less complicated, they're a lot more durable. In fact, these batteries come with a 10-year warranty and a 25-year expected lifespan. This simplicity also means it's entirely practical to service these batteries. So if you drop one of them or damage them in some way, it's entirely reasonable to send them back and have them repaired. And since they're just going somewhere in North America, they can quite easily be taken apart, repaired at the factory at Royer, and sent back to you. That's a lot more practical, a lot more cost effective than throwing the battery out and having to buy a new one. Also, what's interesting is because there are fewer cells in the battery, it's much easier to incorporate really efficient heating. So the engineers have done the math, and it actually makes sense to use some of the heat, some of the energy within these batteries to run small heaters. That puts the cells at in a better temperature range for either accepting or disseminating charge. And because there aren't very many cells in these, it's easier to wrap the entire cell in heating element, which makes the heating a lot more even and a lot more conducive to a longer battery life. What's really neat is each of these batteries is actually Bluetooth enabled as well. So with a very simple app, I can actually check in on these batteries as I'm using them during the day to get a sense of the charge stat and how much I'm using. That's really handy because last year there were a few occasions where I was running some lights, I was running the radio, I was charging some batteries, and I was also using a power tool. And all that together, it's really hard to get a sense of how much you're depleting the batteries. But with a quick check of my phone from across the room, I could get a sense of whether or not I was going to have enough charge to finish out the day. But I do want to give a quick shout out to Royer Batteries. I don't know very much about all this sort of stuff, so I had a few questions when I first got them, and they got back to me right away with very helpful, very clear, and very articulate answers. And that's a customer service model we don't see very often anymore, so I wanted to give them a quick shout out for that. Now, the inverter we got is really nothing special except that it's big enough, as I said, to run some of the big timber frame power tools if I want to. Also, it has a 240 volt output, so I actually tested on some of the smaller shop machines in here, and I can actually run some of the smaller shop machines, which is great because I'll probably have these machines down there before we're all set up with power, and it'll be nice to be able to run a couple of them every now and then if I need to. But also, it is a pure sine wave inverter. What that means is it'll work really well with electronics, especially the electronics in our security lights. But I've also even tested it with a variable frequency drive that I use to run some of my smaller 3-phase equipment, and it works great for that, which is nice. I have a 3-phase drill press, which is a very small motor, but it's a very nice thing to have in a small shop, and I ought to be able to run it quite easily with this setup. So that's really nice. In the next video, I'm going to talk a lot about the construction of the large timber frame brackets that are going to support the huge overhangs on the gable end of the new building. And then after that, we'll probably be out east on the build site, and we'll start talking about laying out the foundation and some of the next steps in the build. If you found this interesting, please hit the thumbs up button. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.